The Red Wedding was a massacre. The music had stopped, the doors were locked, and the blood spilled like wine across the cold stone floors of the twins. Catelyn Stark's final scream still echoed in the halls. Robb's lifeless body slumped beside his direwolf Grey Wind, both pierced through with bolts and blades. Outside the hall, in the shadows of the castle stables, Arya Stark crouched low, heart pounding, breath caught in her throat. She had come so close to seeing her mother, her brother again. But the air had shifted, filled with screams, steel, and betrayal. She tried to move toward the hall, her instincts screaming for her to fight to reach them. The Hound had yanked her back, cursed at her, told her it was too late, but this time he didn't get to throw her over his shoulder and drag her away. A crossbow bolt hissed through the dark and struck Arya square in the back. She fell without a sound. The Hound turned and stared, dumbstruck, as the small body of the wolf girl crumpled into the mud. For a long second, he didn't move. Then something strange came over Sandor Clegane. He roared like a beast, charged toward the archer, and buried his axe into the man's face, again and again, until nothing remained but shattered bone and gore. When it was done, he knelt beside Arya. Her eyes were wide open, staring at the sky. The Hound didn't cry. He just sat there, silent, blood on his hands, smoke in the air, chaos all around. He didn't bury her. He carried her body, across the Trident, away from the twins, into the woods, into the cold, far from the Freys, the Boltons, and the Lannisters. The news of Arya Stark's death spread like wildfire. Ravens flew, whispers crept, and the last flicker of hope for House Stark seemed extinguished. But the gods were not done with Arya Stark. North of the wall, in the haunted woods near the Frostfangs, a three-eyed raven dreamed of a girl with a sword, a girl with a list, a girl who had wolf's blood in her veins and fire in her soul. Bran Stark, deep in visions, saw her fall. He felt her die, but in the deep corners of the Weirwood's memories, something shifted. At her death, a ripple echoed through the trees, and in a place where death had many faces, the many-faced god paused. In the house of black and white, across the sea in Braavos, a nameless girl jerked upright from sleep, gasping. She had never met Arya Stark, yet tears rolled down her cheeks for someone she had once been, or might have been. Jaqen H'ghar walked into the room and said only one word: time. Time passed. The war raged on. The Boltons claimed the north. The Lannisters tightened their grip on the throne. Jon Snow, far at the wall, heard the news and didn't speak for a day. Sansa, captive in the Vale, swallowed her scream and made herself steel. But death does not always mean the end. In the quiet wilds beyond the Vale, something stirred beneath the trees. A girl's body, buried beneath frost and roots, began to dream. Her wolf, Nymeria, howled into the night so loud that even the birds stopped flying. Then the girl opened her eyes. They were no longer just Arya's eyes. They held something deeper, older. The wolf had died, but the girl remained, touched by something ancient. The old gods had whispered her name into the wind, and death, it seemed, had listened. She woke in silence, staring up at the sky between black, twisted branches. Her breath came out in short, sharp bursts, steam rising from her lips like smoke. Snowflakes fell gently onto her cheeks, melting against her skin, and for a moment, Arya Stark didn't know who she was. Her back ached where the bolt had pierced her, but there was no wound. Only a faint, silvery mark remained, cold to the touch and pulsing faintly, like it remembered the pain even if her body no longer did. She sat up slowly, her fingers digging into the frozen earth beneath her. She wasn't in the Riverlands anymore. She wasn't even near the twins. Somehow, impossibly, she was far to the north, too far. She turned and looked around. Snow blanketed the ground, untouched by man or beast. The trees seemed to watch her with eyes older than the north itself. Then came a low growl. Nymeria. The direwolf stepped out from between the trees, massive, wild, and covered in snow and blood. Arya stood, weak, trembling, but alive. The moment their eyes met, something locked in place again, something ancient and unbroken. The bond had never truly died. Nymeria approached slowly, sniffed her hand, then nuzzled into her. Arya collapsed into the thick fur, hugging the wolf with a desperation only the dead could understand. She didn't know how she was alive. She didn't know what had brought her back. But something deep in her gut whispered a truth. This second life was not a gift. It was a purpose, a warning. She'd been taken from death not to be saved, but to do something. Something the gods had chosen her for. Far to the south, Stark-Lannister sat in the Red Keep and drank wine while the small folk starved. In the Dreadfort, Ramsay Bolton hunted girls in the woods like rabbits. The Freys feasted on the remains of the Red Wedding with smug, greasy fingers, and Arya Stark remembered every name. Walder Frey, Rose Bolton, Ramsay, the Mountain, Cersei, Meryn Trant, Elyn Payne, the Hound, Joffrey. No, he was dead now, but his ghost still haunted her. She had more names. She would add more. But she would not return as a girl in rags, half-starved and swinging needle like a stick. This time she would become something else. Bran Stark sat cross-legged beneath the great weirwood tree beyond the wall, his eyes white, lost in vision. His hand rested against the roots, and his breath came slowly. The three-eyed raven, ancient and hollow-eyed, watched him silently. Bran's mind moved through time like smoke. He saw the moment Arya fell. He saw the many-faced god pause. He saw her buried in the cold dirt of the Vale, and then he saw her rise again. "She's changed," Bran whispered. "Yes," the raven said. "She carries death now, but not its chains, its purpose." Bran opened his eyes, filled with cold, knowing. "She's coming for them, isn't she?" The raven did not answer, but the wind howled through the trees. Sansa heard of it first from Podrick, who had heard it from a merchant fleeing the Riverlands. A rumor, they said. A wolf bigger than a horse, stalking Lannister supply trains and flaying guards in the night. A girl with ghost eyes, cloaked in rags and snow, leaving no footprints behind. "A white?" Brienne asked. "No," Sansa said softly. "Not a white. A ghost." She rose from her chair in the cold tower of the Eyrie and walked to the window. The Vale stretched before her, a prison of mountains and snow. "Arya's dead," she whispered. But her voice didn't sound certain. She remembered Arya's face. Stubborn, fierce, always running toward danger instead of away from it. She had never wanted to be a lady. Never wanted the rules, the gowns, the politics. She had wanted a sword, a name, and a reason. And now it seemed she had all three. In the Riverlands, Walder Frey sat upon his ugly throne of bones and mockery. He laughed as another of his bastard sons told him the wolves were back in the woods, that strange things moved in the night. He laughed until one of his daughters walked in with her throat slit from ear to ear, and didn't fall. She smiled at him. The girl in the Frey hall moved like a shadow, her bloodied dress dragging across the floor as she stepped over her own corpse. Her face was pale, her eyes empty, except for the trace of a smile that twisted at the edges of her mouth. Walder. Frey's laughter died in his throat as he reached for the dagger at his belt, but his hands trembled too much to hold it steady. The hall emptied in seconds. Guards tripped over benches, sons screamed, daughters fled, and all the old man could do was watch the dead girl stand before him like judgment wrapped in silk and silence. "Arya Stark is dead," he croaked, his voice raw. "You're not real." The girl tilted her head. "A girl died once, but she came back with a list." Then she lunged. When the body was found, Walder Frey's face was frozen in horror. His eyes gouged out, his tongue nailed to his own chair. The servant said they heard wolves that night, howling through the cracks in the stones. But no wolves were ever found. They also said the wine turned to blood in their mouths. Arya moved through Westeros like a curse. She didn't ride, she walked, with Nymeria always watching from the trees, her pack close behind, silent and deadly. The girl who once couldn't kill a pigeon without flinching now slit throats in the dark without a whisper. She became a myth, the ghost of the North. Some said she was a faceless one, others called her the Stark Banshee. The Lannisters called her a liar, until their guards started dying, one by one. At Castle Black, Jon Snow sat beside the fire. Ghost curled at his feet when Samwell Tarly handed him the letter. "It's not a letter," Sam explained nervously. It's a message from the wildlings." Jon unfolded the parchment. 3 words written in blood-red ink. "She is coming." Jon's heart sank. "Who?" I think it's Arya." He looked up sharply. "Arya's dead." Sam hesitated. "Are you sure?" Jon didn't answer. Deep down, he wasn't. He remembered Arya's small hand in his, the day he gave her needle. She'd been a child then, stubborn and sharp-eyed, with too much wolf blood in her. But he also remembered the way Ghost perked up when the howls came, from the woods. Ghost never howled back. He listened, as if to a leader. Something had changed, and Jon felt it in his bones. He stood. If it's really her, then everything is about to change. In King's Landing, Queen Cersei sipped wine in the small council chambers, while Qyburn whispered to her, "There's unrest in the Riverlands, Your Grace." "Your Grace." "Peasant rebellions?" she asked, bored. "No. Assassinations, executions. Highborn families are being slaughtered. No one knows by who." She raised an eyebrow. "Whoever it is, they're doing the realm a favor." Qyburn hesitated. "They're targeting Freys, Boltons, Lannister allies." Cersei's goblet froze mid-air. She left this. Qyburn held up a coin. Valyrian steel, black, faceless. Cersei snatched it, turned it over in her hand. Her lips tightened. "She's dead," she hissed. Qyburn said nothing, but Cersei saw it in his eyes. Fear, real, trembling fear. Not of the girl, but of what she represented. A shadow in the shape of vengeance, a Stark who'd clawed her way back from the grave. "She'll come for me," Cersei said coldly. "She may already be here." In the north, Winterfell burned. The Boltons thought they were gods now. Rose sat in the great hall like a king. Ramsay hunted girls and fed them to his dogs. But the snows had started to fall early, and with them came something worse than winter. A message came to Rose one night, tied to the headless body of his steward. It read, "The North remembers, so does she." Ramsay didn't believe in ghosts until he woke in the kennels with the dogs silent and afraid. He reached for his knife, but it was gone. A voice came from the dark. "You fed women to your hounds. Let's see how you taste." Then the cage opened. By morning the kennels were painted red, and Ramsay Bolton was no more. Sansa heard of it next. She sat by a frozen window in the Eyrie, watching the white winds roll through the valleys. Lord Baelish had grown restless, whispering of crowns and chaos, of alliances and wars. But none of it mattered to her anymore, because the letter in her lap carried only 5 words. "Sister, we take it back." She folded it gently, pressed it to her lips, and smiled for the first time in years. Arya was alive, and Winterfell would be theirs again. Cersei Lannister paced the cold stone floors of the Red Keep, the wine in her goblet left untouched, a rare thing. Her eyes were bloodshot from sleepless nights, her nerves frayed. The walls felt like they were closing in on her. The coin still sat on the table beside her, faceless, smooth. a promise carved into metal. Arya Stark was dead. She had seen the ravens, heard the stories, but the rumors wouldn't stop. Her informants whispered of strange deaths in the Riverlands, Frey sons vanishing from locked rooms, Bolton men strung up in trees with their faces flayed off. But eyes missing. Always the eyes. One Lannister knight had been found in the middle of a feast, stabbed through both sockets with sewing needles. Needle, Cersei whispered aloud, the name of Arya's blade echoing in her head. She threw the goblet against the wall. Wine splashed across the stone like blood. She's dead, she told herself again. But the fear clawing in her chest didn't care for logic. And deep down she knew, the gods, old or new, had never favored her. Not really. Every child she bore was dead. Her father, gone. Her power was borrowed. Fragile. She could feel Arya coming. Not like an assassin, but like a reckoning, one that even wildfire couldn't burn away. Far in the north, Arya knelt before the heart tree in the godswood of Winterfell. Snow fell heavy around her, but she did not feel cold. Her fingers rested on the bark, red as blood, white as bone. She listened to the whisper of the old gods, and they listened back. Sansa stood a few feet behind her, cloaked in thick furs. She hadn't said a word since Arya arrived. She had simply opened the gates of the Eyrie and thrown herself into her sister's arms, sobbing like the child she hadn't been for years. Now she watched Arya silently. "You really died," Sansa finally said. Arya nodded. "For a moment, maybe longer." Sansa swallowed hard. "And the gods brought you back?" Arya stood. "No, not all of them, just the ones who still care about the North." There was steel in her voice, but sorrow too. She hadn't come back whole, not really. A part of her still belonged to death, still heard the voices in the dark. But Sansa was a piece of the past worth holding on to, a thread of innocence, even if frayed. "What now?" Sansa asked. Arya looked up to the castle, her home, their legacy, and let the snow touch her face. "We finish what they started," she said. "We take back the North, and then I go to her." "Cersei?" Arya didn't need to answer. Sansa already knew. Jon Snow stood before the gathered wildlings and brothers of the Watch. The news had reached Castle Black on the wings of ravens and rumors. Arya Stark, alive. Ramsay Bolton, dead. The North in flames. Tormund Giantsbane spat in the snow. "The girl's got more fight than half the realm." "She's not a girl anymore," Jon replied. "She's a ghost with a sword." He looked to the south. "We march at dawn." "Even if the Boltons are falling?" Sam asked. "Isn't it over?" Jon shook his head. "Not until the wolf flies over Winterfell again." Ghost howled in agreement. Back in Winterfell, Roose Bolton sat alone in the great hall, reading by candlelight. His steward had not returned. His sons had vanished. The hounds were silent. He heard the first sound too late, a soft, distant whistle, like a lullaby. Then the lights went out. Rose reached for his blade, but he wasn't fast enough. A shadow fell behind him, and a whisper slid across his neck. "A girl has one more name." The knife found his throat before he could turn. Arya held him there as he gurgled and twitched, her face blank, her eyes cold. When he stopped moving, she let him drop to the floor like a sack of meat. She walked out of Winterfell's hall alone, but she wasn't alone. Sansa waited outside. So did the bannermen, the wildlings, the Northmen who had been waiting for a sign. They saw her bloodied, snow-covered, standing tall, and they knelt. "The North remembers," one said. "A Stark is back," another whispered. And just like that, the North rose again. Cersei received the news in her chambers. "Maester." Pycelle handed her the scroll with trembling hands, sweat beading on his forehead. "Winterfell has fallen," he said, "to the Starks." Cersei read the note once, then again, slowly, carefully. At the bottom of the parchment were two words, "I'm coming." The goblet slipped from her hand and shattered on the marble floor. The gates of King's Landing had never been closed to a ghost before. That was their first mistake. Arya Stark entered the city like smoke on the wind, not through the front gates, not with banners and armies like Jon or Sansa would have known. Arya came in through the sewers, through the stink and the filth, where rats whispered and shadows moved without sound. She had walked through blood, snow, fire. The rot of the capital didn't bother her. She had changed faces twice before she reached the Red Keep. Once, a washerwoman with cracked fingers and a crooked back. Then, a squire with freckles and dead eyes. And finally, she was no one, just a shadow. She moved like she belonged there because death always belongs. Queen Cersei stared out across Blackwater Bay from her tower, her fingers pressed to the cool glass. Her hair had grown longer, but the lines around her eyes were deeper. She hadn't slept more than a few hours in weeks. The nightmares were constant. Arya's name never left her mind. She had tried to laugh it off at first. A dead girl couldn't haunt a queen, but the messages kept coming. One less fray. Ramsay sends his regards. The North remembers. The small council grew smaller every week. Assassinations, disappearances, resignations. Qyburn was the last she trusted, and even he had grown jumpy, flinching at every knock. And Sir Gregor, he stood beside her always, a mountain in rusted gold, but even he could not guard against shadows. "She will come for you," Qyburn whispered one night. "They always come for queens in the end." Cersei said nothing, but she slept with a dagger beneath her pillow. In the streets of Flea Bottom, rumors spread like wildfire. They said a wolf had been seen in the sewers, that a woman in black had slit a Lannister knight's throat in front of the Sept ruins and vanished into smoke, that the faceless men were here, or worse, that the North had sent a ghost. In the taverns, drunkards toasted to "the little wolf come to bite the lion." Arya heard them all. She smiled only once, when a little girl whispered that the Lion Queen was shaking in her throne. Then she moved again. Jaime Lannister rode through the gates of King's Landing under cover of night, cloaked in black, his golden hand hidden beneath a glove. His hair was greyer now, his face harder. He had heard the rumors from the Riverlands, of Arya, of Winterfell, of Roose and Ramsay, of heads on spikes. And now she was here. He had once promised Catelyn Stark he'd protect her daughters. That promise had burned in his gut ever since. Now only Arya remained, and she was hunting his sister. He found her before the city did. It was in a quiet alley near the Sept of Baelor ruins. He caught only a flicker, the curve of her blade, the glint in her eyes, the way she moved without sound. She didn't run when he stepped from the shadows. "I wondered when you'd come," she said. "I didn't come to stop you," Jaime said, "only to ask one thing." She raised an eyebrow. "When it's done, don't burn the city." Arya tilted her head. "You think I'm here for war? I think you're here for justice." She stepped closer. He didn't flinch. "I'm not here for justice," she whispered. "I'm here for the last name." Jaime nodded slowly. "Then don't miss." He let her go. Inside the Red Keep, Cersei drank alone in her chambers. The doors were locked. Sir Gregor stood outside. The room was silent. And then it wasn't. A girl stood across from her, young, small, dressed like a servant. Cersei blinked, fumbled for her dagger. The girl smiled. She was holding a tray of wine. But Cersei saw her eyes. Wolf eyes. She screamed. The girl moved faster than any servant should. The tray hit the floor. The dagger found Cersei's hand. Then the real Arya stepped from behind the curtains, quiet as snowfall, and pressed the point of needle to Cersei's throat. "She begged," Arya said coldly. "Your maid. She begged me not to wear her face." Cersei trembled, blood running from her palm. "You can't," she stuttered. "You don't get to decide." Arya's voice was soft. I died once, now I get to decide everything. And then she ended it. Quick, clean, silent. Just another face in the dark. By morning, Cersei Lannister's body was found seated on the Iron Throne. No wounds, no blood, just wide, empty eyes staring at nothing. In her lap, someone had left a coin, black, faceless. The Lion Queen was dead, and outside the bells rang. Not for a queen's death, but for a Stark's return. The bells tolled long into the morning, their echoes bouncing across the narrow streets, the towers, and the blood-stained walls of the Red Keep. For once, the people of King's Landing did not fear what followed the sound. No wildfire, no dragons, no death raining from above, just silence, stillness, a kind of peace they had forgotten existed. The Iron Throne stood alone beneath the ruined ceiling of the throne room, cold and jagged, a skeleton of power that had cost the realm too much. And on it, the corpse of Cersei Lannister, Queen of Ashes, Mother of Madness, and finally, just another name scratched off a list. Arya hadn't stayed long after she placed the coin on Cersei's lap. She never stayed long. By the time the first guards arrived, she was already gone, through the tunnels, into the shadows, vanishing like breath on cold glass. No face, no trace, but word travelled. By midday, every slum, castle, and corner of the realm knew the North had won, and the last lion had fallen to the wolf. Jon Snow stood before the small council in the ruins of the Great Hall. The banners had been torn down, the gold lion sigils burned. What remained was smudged soot marks on stone and the faint scent of smoke and blood in the air. "I won't take the throne," Jon said. "You're the last Targaryen," Davos reminded him. "Then it ends with me." He turned to Sansa. She stood tall beside him, red hair braided like a crown, eyes steady and sharp. "The North is free," she said, "and it will remain that way." Yara Greyjoy crossed her arms. "And the Iron Islands? We fought for our own freedom too," Yara added, staring down at Jon. Tyrion, thinner now, worn down to bone and guilt, looked at them both. "Then maybe that's the answer. No more one throne to rule them all. Let each kingdom stand, alone but together." Murmurs filled the hall. For once they weren't violent. Arya watched from the shadows. She wasn't there to rule. She never was. Her gift was the quiet hand behind the end of tyranny, the invisible blade that had done what armies could not. No crown could fit on a head that belonged to no one. But as she listened to the murmurs of peace, real peace, for the first time, she felt something unfamiliar, something soft. Hope. They burned the Iron Throne that evening. Jon lit the pyre himself. The throne cracked and hissed as flames consumed it, the metal melting slowly, screaming like a dying beast. The people gathered in silence. No cheering, no jeering, just eyes full of ash and wonder. "What comes next?" Podrick asked quietly. Brienne, standing beside him in her polished white armor, said simply, "Something better." Arya didn't stay to watch the throne fall. She had seen enough endings to know when one was true. She walked through the city alone that night, her hood drawn low. People passed her. Some whispered, some nodded, a few even bowed. But none stopped her. She was legend now, but legends don't linger. At the docks, Sansa found her before she boarded the ship. "Leaving already?" Sansa asked, her voice tight. Arya turned. "I'm not made for castles." "You don't even know where you're going." Arya smiled faintly. "That's the point." She looked out over the waves. The ship was ready. Supplies packed. No sigil flew from the sails. "What's west of Westeros?" she asked softly. "No one knows." "I want to know." Sansa hugged her fiercely, tighter than ever before. "You're all I have left." Arya pulled back and pressed a dagger into her hand. "No, you have yourself now." They both knew what that meant. Arya had taken vengeance. She had ended the list. She had seen Westeros bleed and burn, and now it was time to leave it behind. The ship left the harbour at dawn. No fanfare, no ceremony, just the sun rising over the sea, casting golden light over the girl at the bow. Wind in her hair, steel at her side, the past behind her and the world ahead. Arya Stark of Winterfell, no one and someone, wolf and ghost, sister and storm, and finally, free. The sea was endless, a flat, glittering sheet stretching beyond the horizon, untouched by map or memory. Arya stood at the bow of the ship, eyes fixed on that infinite blue, one hand resting on the hilt of needle, the other gripping the wood rail as if the waves might try to pull her under. Behind her, Westeros faded into a misty silhouette. Castles, thrones, blood, ghosts, all left behind. She had no plan, no destination, only a direction, west. She dreamed of lands where no one had ever spoken her name, of forests older than time, of islands untouched by war, of people who didn't speak of kings and dragons and betrayal, and she dreamed of wolves. Sometimes, when the night was quiet and the stars blinked above like forgotten gods, she heard Nymeria's howl, far, far away but not gone. Her tether still existed, maybe always would, but now Arya was on her own path, not revenge, not justice, just freedom. Back in Westeros, Winterfell bloomed again, not with flowers, but with life. The forges burned bright, the halls were filled with laughter. Ravens flew but carried good news now, harvests, marriages, letters from the south. Sansa Stark sat on the high seat of Winterfell, the direwolf banner flying above her. She had refused crowns of gold. Instead she wore a circlet made of carved weirwood and steel, Old North and New. The people loved her not because she ruled, but because she remembered. She remembered the cost. When food ran low in smaller villages, she sent half the stores. When wildling children were found near the wall, she brought them south and gave them homes. When lords complained, she reminded them how quickly wolves could starve when they hunted alone. The North had its queen, not by name, but by heart, and it was hers forever. At Castle Black, Jon Snow rebuilt the Watch, not as guards against wildlings, but as protectors of the realm's edge, a peacekeeper, a watcher, a final warning should anything rise again from the dark. Tormund called it boring, Sam called it progress, Jon just called it duty, but sometimes, late at night, he would stand atop the wall and stare south, imagining Arya sailing somewhere unknown, wondering if she had found peace, or if peace was even something people like them could ever have. Ghost stood at his side, always silent, watchful, still howling in his dreams. King's Landing transformed in ways no one had expected. There was no king. Instead, the Great Council met quarterly. 7 kingdoms, 7 voices, 7 votes. Tyrion Lannister remained. The voice of reason, his sharp tongue now softened by guilt and time. Brienne of Tarth led the King's Guard, now known simply as the Crown's Guard. Her code was simple: protect the people, protect the peace. There were no more executions for sport, no more secret dungeons. The Iron Throne's destruction had birthed something rare, humility, and when the name Arya Stark was spoken in the capital, it was no longer with fear, but reverence. She ended it, they whispered. She was the one who finished the war. They called her many things. Now the Ghost of the North, the Blade in the Dark, the Queen with no throne, the last Stark. But she wasn't any of those things, not really. West of Westeros, the stars changed. Arya's ship sailed through mists and islands that moved like dreams. One morning they passed, a floating forest, trees with silver leaves drifting atop the sea like giants asleep. Another time they came across a fleet of shattered ships, all wrecked but untouched by rot. Voices whispered through them at night. She met no people for weeks, only silence, until the birds changed. They grew brighter, louder, familiar. Nymeria's howl echoed one night so clearly, Arya bolted awake and ran to the deck. And there, on the waves, she saw it. Land, not in any book, not in any Meister's scroll, green, lush, untamed, and waiting. Arya grinned, a true grin. Not the cold twist she wore when someone was about to die, but a smile of wonder, of curiosity. She turned to her crew, all eyes on her. "We make shore by morning," she said. "And then what?" "Someone." As Arya looked to the land again, "We explore, we map, we live." And quietly to herself she added, "We begin again." The wind was gentler that morning, warm and carrying the scent of something wild, something that didn't belong to the seas of Westeros. Arya stood at the bow, bare feet planted firm, hair whipping across her face. Behind her the crew stood. In silence, even the waves seemed to hush as the ship finally touched the edge of the unknown. The new land was not like Westeros. The trees glowed faintly in the early sun, their trunks wide and twisted like they had grown through centuries of secrets. Birds with feathers the color of fire darted between vines. The beach was soft, not sand but fine white dust, and when Arya stepped onto it, her foot sank slightly, like the earth was welcoming her. She bent down and let her fingers graze the ground. Warm, warm, alive, real. This was no illusion, no dream. It was the beginning of a world that no map had dared imagine. They set up camp near a cliff that overlooked the coastline. Waterfalls roared in the distance. Strange beasts called out in the jungle behind them, not threatening, but unfamiliar. Everything here felt untouched, pure, a world before man. Arya didn't command the crew. She didn't need to. They trusted her, the girl who had crossed an empire, avenged her family, ended a queen, and walked through death untouched. But out here, in the wild, she wasn't the ghost of the North anymore. She was just Arya, and she was finally free to live. In the weeks that followed, they discovered rivers so clear you could see fish the color of gold, trees that whispered when you leaned against them, caves with drawings etched into the walls, stories told by a people long vanished. Arya spent hours tracing those symbols with her fingertips, wondering who they were, what they believed, how they died, or if they'd ever really been gone at all. Some nights she sat by the fire with a map in her lap, slowly drawing this new world by hand. No Meister's ink, no sigils, just lines, forests, rivers, mountains, a world written not in blood, but in discovery. "I never thought I'd die an explorer," she whispered one night. A young sailor nearby chuckled, "You're not dying." She smiled. "No, I'm not." Letters still made their way back to Westeros, through secret routes and trusted ships. Sansa would receive them in Winterfell, her eyes scanning each line slowly, her fingers trembling just slightly. She'd read them by candlelight, her counsel forgotten for a while, the cold north made warmer by her sister's words. One letter read, "The people here don't know war. I asked what they fight over, and they didn't understand the question. They plant. They sing. They raise their children beneath trees that touch the clouds. I watched a boy feed a bird with no fear in his eyes. I couldn't remember the last time I'd seen that, even in Bran." Another. "Sometimes I miss snow. I miss the quiet kind that falls and blankets everything until it all feels clean again. But out here, everything feels clean already. Maybe it's because no one has tried to rule it." Sansa cried the first time. Not because Arya was far, but because she knew, for once, her sister had found something that wasn't a mission, a death list, or a war. She had found life. One night, under a sky littered with stars unfamiliar to even the oldest charts, Arya sat alone on a cliff. A single candle beside her flickered in the wind. She pulled out needle, old now, but still sharp. Still hers. She placed it on the ground and stared at it. "I don't need you anymore," she said, but she didn't throw it away. She stood, walked to the edge, and breathed in the scent of rain and salt and freedom. For a moment, she closed her eyes and saw everyone: Robb, Catelyn, Ned, Jon, Sansa, Bran, Gendry, the Hound, Syrio, Yoren, Jaqen, Gilly, Sam, even Cersei in the end. So many ghosts behind her. But for the first time, she didn't feel haunted. She felt held. She opened her eyes and looked forward again. No thrones, no names to cross, no faces to wear, no revenge, no past, only a horizon waiting to be discovered. And that was the end of Arya Stark's story. Not in blood, not in darkness, but in light, wind, and the endless whisper of new beginnings. The girl who was no one became the woman who found everything.